We'll do a basic lead into this and then general questions and then ready to go.
We're rolling.
Okay, this is an interview of Harry Van Zandt at the New York State Military Museum and Veterans Research Center, Lake Avenue, Saratoga Springs, New York. It is Thursday, July 18th, 2002, approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The interviewer is Michael Russert. Sir, could you state your name and place and date of birth?
Name is Harry Van Zandt, Harry Carl Van Zandt. Born in Plainfield, New Jersey on August the 20th, 1921.
What was your pre-war education?
Pre-war education.
Yes, sir.
I was...
Well, pre-military service.
Okay, I was, of course, high school graduate and worked for a year after getting out of high school, at which time I was in the New Jersey National Guard, the 102nd Cavalry. That's horse cavalry. In Westfield, New Jersey Armory, and then left there, was discharged from there to go to college, to Rutgers University. And I was in, supposedly to graduate in class of 44, but while at Rutgers I went into ROTC, which of course automatically puts you into the advanced course, puts you in the reserves. At the end of our junior year, 1943, the entire ROTC group of seniors and juniors was called active duty. The seniors immediately went to OCS at Fort Benning. The juniors went from Fort Dix to Fort McClellan, Alabama for basic training, a long basic training. We were in 3 different companies there at different times. Finally ended up in a company with nothing but ROTC people. And for a short time we went back to Rutgers in the ASTP program, basically because they didn't know what to do with us, is what it amounts to.
Could you explain what ASTP means?
Army Specialized Training Program.
Okay.
This was a program that the government instituted in World War II. So I don't know that, I have always suspected the reason they did it was to keep the universities solvent and in business. But when we went back to Rutgers, there was no one on campus except people in uniform in the ASTP program. And we spent less than a semester there, and then finally they sent us off to Fort Benning to OCS, Infantry OCS. Some of the group went into armor, and part of our ROTC group at Rutgers was, what am I trying to say, communications. They went to Fort Monmouth for OCS there. But yeah, we ended up at Fort Benning, and then from there we're assigned to various units. I went to the 65th Infantry Division at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and we shipped over. The 65th was one of the last divisions formed in World War II, and one of the last divisions to be shipped to the ETO also. We arrived there, trying to remember about when, well, regardless, the Battle of the Bulge was on at that time. We were slated to go to England, but they changed our orders in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean because of the Battle of the Bulge, and we ended up at the very southern end of the Siegfried Line in near Sauerlautern, which if you try to find it on a map now, you'll find it's Saarlouis, because it was in that section along the Saar River that was disputed back and forth between France and Germany for so many years, but it's called Saarlouis now. And that was our first action at that point. We landed at Le Havre, one of those temporary built docks there, and climbed down those rope nets and on LSDs, and then we're trucked up to the top of a hill there with a lot of snow on the ground, And that's all there was just an open plain with snow on it and a pile every once in a while, and underneath that pile were tents. And we dug out the tents and set up camp, and that became Camp Lucky Strike, which every GI in the ETO has heard of, because that was a port of debarkation on the way home, Camp Lucky Strike. And it became a port of embarkation too, coming in. But there by train, 40 and 8s, through France, ended up in near Thionville, France, and from there moved on up to the Siegfried Line. And at that point I had well, even in the States, I had an anti-tank platoon, a battalion anti-tank platoon. And we crossed the Saar River. Our first action, as I said, was Saarlautern, and then moved on up through to Thionville, and then kept on moving north, crossed the Mainz River, at which point I became the battalion S2, intelligence officer for the battalion, and spent the rest of the wartime in that capacity. But that's about it. Ended up the war. We were moving on a straight line towards Berlin, actually. Got as far as Erfurt, Germany. When they turned us around, headed us south, and we came down through Germany, heading towards Hitler's, what they call Hitler's final redoubt, which was in the Alps. Turned out to be there was no final redoubt, but anyhow, that's where we sent. We came on down through Austria, and our outfit ended up on the banks of the Enns River. That's E-N-N-S, not Enns, Enns. South of Enns, Austria, in a little town of Schmitting. Yeah. And then we moved back into Linz, Austria, and I spent the rest of my time with the 65th Division in Linz, at which time the outfit was being deactivated, and the personnel was scattered to all different units. Some of them were shipped back to the States, depending on points. Actually, the theory was then if you were shipped back to the States, you would be reassigned to an outfit that was going to the South Pacific. And I know my battalion commander told me I could have my choice, either stay with as Army of Occupation or go back to the States, and I decided it'd be safer to Army of Occupation. So from there I stayed in Linz, and various outfits came in. After the 65th, I was in the 26th Division, Yankee Division, and then the Ohio National Guard Division, the 83rd, and then finally I was transferred to the 42nd Rainbow Division, and at that point I was transferred to Salzburg, Austria, and spent the rest of my time in Salzburg.
Well, could you tell us about some of your combat experiences?
Very damn little. As I say, we got over there late, and actually we got over there in time for the rat race is about what it amounts to, but it was a matter of getting on trucks and convoys and moving down the Autobahn, and just the Germans were disappearing. Most of the resistance was, for the most part, was, what do they call them? The fighters, but they weren't the army. The real best army of the German army was facing the Russians, and we had very few real serious actions, with the exception of one town in southern Germany. Their Neumarkt was a tough one, and then some of the other regiments had other towns where they ran into serious difficulties. But,
now, with your anti-tank unit, did you ever run up against any German tanks? Or
no,
when you were
and good thing. That 57 millimeter anti-tank gun wasn't much worse. In fact, while I was with it, as I say, when we came online, first got online, we were in a little town called Wadgassen on the Saar River, and directly across from us we could see the German pillboxes, and the Germans were on one side of the river and we were on the other, and they It's pretty much a gentleman's agreement. You shoot one shot at us and we'll shoot one shot at you. But for the hell of it, it dragged one of those guns down, so we had a clear shot at a pillbox and fired several rounds across there, and it didn't even chip the concrete on that pillbox. And I caught hell the next day from all the rifle company commanders because the Germans sent a patrol over the river that night to find out who was shooting at them. And so, of course, the rifle companies got into a little scrap on that account. But that was the only shot that I think those guns were fired in all of World War II. Yeah. But
When you were in Austria, were you ever close to Patton, where Patton was?
oh, we were in Patton's Third Army.
Mm-hmm. What was your opinion of Patton? Did you ever see him? Or?
Yes. When we first got there, we were in a little French, near Thionville. Haute-Guenage was the name of the town our battalion was stationed in. And we got word that an officer and an enlisted man from each company in the division was to go on this little jaunt. They took us down to this little French village with a square in the middle of the village. And we lined up 4 abreast around this square, and we still didn't know what we were there for until 4 jeeps rode in with 50 caliber machine guns, one to each one of the corners of that square pointing skyward, and a 5th jeep came in, and out stepped Patton, and he climbed up on the hood of his jeep and gave us a pep talk, welcomed us to the Third Army, and he was quite colorful. One thing he was trying to impress on everybody was that they'd carried that rifle with him ever since the States, and half the guys that got over there forgot to even shoot it. And he told us it was as worthless as a pecker on a nun, if you don't use it. That's exactly what and he never used the word German, never used the word Nazi. Whenever he mentioned him, it was goddamn sons of bitchin' bastards. Yep. He said he wasn't advocating murder in cold blood. He said he don't want you to line anybody up against a wall and shooting them down. He said shoot the goddamn sons of bitchin' bastards before you get them to the wall. But that's the way he talked. But that was the only time I saw him. Other than I had when I was Battalion S2, I used to lead the road march and put up road signs with my section. And right behind my Jeep came a tank destroyer. This lieutenant in the tank destroyer had been with Patton on one of his jaunts into, when you'd read the headlines, American forces advanced 20 miles into Germany and so on. He'd say that would be us, and we'd be sitting out there all by ourselves, completely surrounded by Germans, and he cussed Patton. He hated his guts, but I didn't have any of that type of experience with him. No.
Now it mentions that you were in charge of a displaced persons camp. Were these former
Oh no,
concentration camp victims?
no,
or?
no. This was just on the outskirts of Efferding, Austria, just on the outskirts of Linz, where there is that time was the Hermann Goering Steel Works were located there. And it was quite a railroad center too. Now these were people that came into work. Now most of them were what we call Volksdeutsch. They spoke German. When they were being repatriated, you would have to find out not only what town they were born in, but when they were born, so you could ship them back to that town, because those towns had changed hands from, so many times between, would it be Czechoslovakia? Most of them were more or less Czechs, and that was the extent of it.
Were you ever aware of the concentration camps?
Oh yes, oh yes.
How did you feel about these? Did you ever see any of them, or?
Yeah, Mauthausen, concentration camp just north of Enns, Austria. Yeah.
What were your feelings when you saw these?
Well, it's hard. I don't recall what my feelings were. I didn't see bodies lined, piled up, anything like that. Just saw the camp itself and the facilities is what it amounts to. But and that particular camp had all different kinds of people in it: Russian, Polish. Yeah.
Now, it also mentioned that when you were with the 42nd Division, you were in charge of a POW camp where these
A small camp, yeah.
German...
Ex-German soldiers, right? Yeah. And had a platoon of men there to guard the place. But it was a peaceful existence for them. This camp was just on the outside of the fence of a general hospital, U.S. General Hospital. They had taken over what had been an SS, I think it was an officer's school, just on the outskirts of Salzburg, just north of Salzburg, and getting up towards Birch's Garden way. And these were real comfortable, nice buildings, very nice place. And the hospital that was there was a hospital that had been, General Hospital had been in England since early on in the war, and these doctors and nurses had been overseas all that time. But the prisoners were, our men would take 3 or 4 of them out each day, one man to each 3 or 4 of them, and on work details around the hospital area. Yeah, that's what it amounted to. But no problems.
Okay, between World War II and Korea, you were in the reserves?
Inactive reserves. Inert reserves. Okay, yes. Right.
All right. So you were called back into active service in '51. You want to talk about your service in Korea?
Not really.
No.
No, I was called back actually in 1950, but I was at home with pneumonia. So the review board camp at San Pedro, California. I was living in California at that time. Postponed my recall date to January the 2nd, 1951. Yeah. So that's when I reported to Camp Stoneman, California. And they were nice enough to give us a 2-week refresher course at Fort Ord, California. And then we went over to Travis Airfield Base and got on a Pan American flight to Japan. Yeah. From there by train down to Sasebo, and then from Sasebo over across to Busan by Maru, and then by train up to Suwon, I think it was, yeah, where the 3rd Replacement Company was. At which point, I was assigned to the 3rd Division when I was in Japan. And when I got over to Korea, to the 3rd Replacement Company, I was then learned I was going to be in the 65th Regiment, which was an all Puerto Rican regiment. All the enlisted men were Puerto Rican, and about half of the officers were Continentals and half were Puerto Rican. And I was in the 65th for my tour of duty in Korea. Yeah.
What were the relationships between the Caucasian officers and the Puerto Ricans?
Depended on the Caucasian officers. As far as I was concerned, I got along great with them. And they were a great bunch of soldiers. I felt very fortunate to have been assigned to the 65th once I got to know them. It was a quite different outfit than the GI outfits over there. They had been together for a long time. They'd had years of training. Most of them were regular Army. They were excellent non-coms in the outfit. Whereas the American GI outfit, as you probably know, our Army was in terrible shape at that point when that war started. basic training, I think, was an 8-week program. And then the GIs were sent to an outfit, for instance, outfits stationed in Japan, to finish their training. Well, you know there's no place in Japan to train, maneuver, or anything like that. Instead, they were doing occupation duty. As one officer that we shipped over to Korea with me, a reserve officer, he said the only experience he had in the Army was after the war was over. He was mounting guard duty around the Imperial Palace. That was his experience. Yeah. No combat experience. And of course the outfits that shipped over, the American outfits, were severely under strength. The reason I was in the 3rd Infantry Division, which normally would have been the 7th, the 15th, and the 30th Regiments. They didn't have enough men to fill 2 regiments. So they combined what they had to fill 2 regiments, still weren't filled, so when they got to Japan, they had to fill up the ranks with South Koreans that had been drafted off the streets of Seoul, for instance, and put them in the 3rd Division in order to fill it up. That's what a sorry mess our military was in at the start of the Korean War. It was terrible. And the only thing I can say about the 65th, their weapons were pretty old. And you know, all our equipment was World War II equipment. World War II Jeeps. We had an artillery outfit that supported us, a self-propelled artillery, and their tubes were so worn out that you didn't know where the hell the round was going to land when they fired it. I quit using them, to tell you the truth. We got friendly fire too often, so I said to hell with them. The same thing was true of the 4.2 mortars, which in World War II we call chemical mortars. But here each regiment had its own mortar, 4.2 mortars, but when the 65th left, they didn't have a mortar company. So they took all the cooks and bakers and surplus personnel and made them into the mortar company. But they didn't know anything about firing mortars either. So it was, but the rifle companies were very good, and their esprit de corps was excellent. They had been in World War II pretty much relegated as service troops because they weren't, you couldn't trust them. So they didn't really see any action in World War II. So when they went to Korea, they were going to show the world that they were real soldiers, and they did.
In Korea, you received a 2nd and 3rd Oakley's Cluster and a Bronze Star. Could you talk about that, or your Purple Heart?
Oh, I got a Purple Heart, yeah, for a scratch. I wouldn't have gotten it at all, except the doctor happened to notice my sleeve was all torn, and he wondered how it happened. I showed him the wound, so to speak. The Bronze Star, I got one. I have 4 Bronze Stars. Two of them are for valor, and 2 of them are for meritorious service. In World War II, for instance, anyone who received the Combat Infantryman's Badge was authorized a Bronze Star medal. A lot of World War II veterans don't realize that from the infantry, but that is the case. So that made the 2nd one. The first one, World War II, that was for an action in this town of Neumarket I was telling you about. But then my Bronze Star in Korea I earned on a river crossing operation. And the other Bronze Star was for meritorious service, and I received it about a year after I had been out of the service. Had moved to California, to Texas, and I got this call from Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. They wanted to come out there and have me presented with a Bronze Star medal for meritorious service, and I said no, thank you. So 2 colonels came by my office in Houston, Texas, and gave it to me there at that point. But I know in World War II, the Bronze Star medal, we call it the Officer's Good Conduct Medal. I mean, they are I'm afraid medals have become a laughing stock of the Army.
Now, it mentions that you received a gold medal bravery from Greece.
No, I didn't.
Oh, you didn't. Your
No.
unit?
Huh? Yes.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
all right. No, the unit received that.
Mhm.
And that is not, there's no medal, no nothing, no ribbon, no medal, no nothing. It's just a pennant that is flown on your unit's colors. Yeah.
This was the 65th that received that?
Yeah.
In Korea?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, then my 2nd Battalion received a presidential unit citation in addition to the entire 3rd Division got of course, as every division I think in Korea, they got the Korean presidential unit citation. So, yeah.
When in your form that you said the ability of that regiment, the 65th, enabled you to survive the Korean War. Why did you say that?
Because I was, although I had gone through infantry OCS, I had never served in a rifle company. And these guys were good, and they brought me along and taught me the ropes, is what it amounts to. Yeah, yeah, it's quite different being a battalion intelligence officer. In World War II, I always like to compare World War II and Korea by saying that in World War II, we used road maps, okay? In Korea, we used contour maps. There were no roads. Yeah. And it was basic warfare, whereas my experiences in World War II were not the same at all. Yeah.
Do you have any questions? How do you think your service affected your life?
Just interrupted any career I might have had, I guess, but how it affected my life.
Did you use the GI Bill after the war?
Yes, yeah, I went back to, well, as I told you at Rutgers, we were pulled out after our junior year, so I went back to Rutgers as soon as I got home. By now I was married and had a child. My child was born while I was over right at the end of the war in Austria. Yeah, I went back for 1 semester, and they gave me credit for subjects I hadn't taken. Well, for instance, I got credit for my final year of ROTC, that sort of thing. But I had enough credits after 1 semester to graduate, or to get my diploma, I should say, and we had then moved to California, so I actually graduated in absentia when I was out in California. So I was originally class of 44, but I graduated in 46, I guess, yeah.
What year did you get married?
44.
And how many children did you have?
I have 2 now, yeah,
Okay.
2.
What kind of work did you do following the war?
Let's see, what was the first thing I did? Well, we moved, right after the war, we moved to California, and I went to work for a ceramic tile manufacturer. Well, they manufactured more than that. They manufactured ceramic veneer, clay sewer pipe, and a few other things, but including ceramic tile, and they also made, outfit was Gladding McBean, and they made Franciscan pottery and china, that sort of thing. And I went to work for them in the warehouse, and I was the warehouse manager and warehouse and shipping manager for them when I was recalled. And then when I came out of the Army, I was kind of after Korea, I was kind of footloose, and they didn't know what to do with me. Somebody had taken my job in the meantime, so for a while they had me in sales, but I didn't think much of that. And then I was offered a job in Houston, Texas, which I took, and went from Houston, Texas to Palestine, Texas, and where we built a factory, and then from there the company was going down fast, and I came back up north and went to work for another ceramic tile manufacturer. Yeah. And I retired from that.
Do you have any contact with anyone from the service that you served with?
Yes.
Any,
Yes, yeah. I belong to the 65th Division Society, or what do they call it? The Halbert. But anyhow, they have a reunion every year. This particular year, it's out in Buffalo, as a matter of fact. And strange, because the 3rd Infantry Division is having their reunion, same place basically. Both hotels are overlooking Niagara Falls. One of them's in Canada side, and the other one's, and I don't know which is which. But so I belong to the 3rd Infantry Division Association too, and in addition to the Korean War veterans. But one of the guys who was in my section in World War II, my intelligence section, from Sugar Land, Texas, he has kept in touch. We've kept in touch all these years, and they come up this way for any. We had a reunion up in Burlington, Vermont, and he and his wife came and stayed with me, and we drove up to Burlington together. And who else do I hear from the 65th?
you belong to any veterans organizations outside of the Korean War?
VFW.
Do you belong-
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The one down in Clifton Park, Half Moon. Yeah, it's tough to. Oh, you talked about hearing from people. I had a very interesting hear from. The National Korean War Veterans Association puts out a newsletter. I'm trying to think now, was it that or was it the 3rd Division? I forget, but they published an article about an old soldier who had died in the hospital in Washington, Veterans Hospital. And it talked about him was a guy named Pedro Rodriguez, who was the master sergeant and platoon leader in my company over in Korea. And so I wrote an article about it, which was published. And when I got the magazine from the outfit, in the same mail was a letter from a fellow named Luis Rodriguez. And Luis Rodriguez was a first lieutenant when I first met him. And I met him at the 3rd Replacement Company. He was on his way back from the hospital, on his way back to the 65th Regiment. And he had been shot through his combat infantryman's badge, which deflected the bullet enough so that it saved his life. But he still had the badge with this big hole in it and all wrinkled up that he was wearing. And when I got to Fox Company, where I was finally assigned, here was Luis Rodriguez. He was the exec officer of the company. And he was one of the first to rotate when they started that stupid rotation program in the Army, individual rotation. He was the first one to rotate from Fox Company, and the first group that went from the 65th Regiment, as a matter of fact. And he would send me letters and postcards from the States. And I wrote him back a letter, and he sent me a copy of that letter. It was written in June of 1951, and he sent it to me after seeing this article. But and then he sent me a whole bunch of other stuff too about it, and he's talked to me on the phone several times since. Put me in touch with another guy, Tomas Gaffane, who was the company commander when I joined the company, and then I've heard from other people, Puerto Ricans primarily, except for one, well, two lately. Yeah, I've heard from Romeo Bucknell. He's down in North Carolina, and also from a couple of Puerto Ricans, one in New York City, one in California, who were in the company too. And when they saw my name on the roster, they started corresponding. Yeah.
Are you going to the 65th reunion?
The 65th Regiment?
Regiment reunion.
They don't have a reunion.
I thought you said
No, it's 65th Division.
division, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, it's confusing. I had
Yes, I'm
65th
sorry.
Division, we're over
Yes.
to 65th Regiment.
Okay.
But no, they have an association in Puerto Rico, but they are not. Well, after I left, with this rotation and casualties, and they suffered a lot of casualties. But my company, for instance, had about a 200% turnover in personnel while I was with them in Korea, which was about 13 months. I'm sorry, it wasn't even 13 months because I was transferred to a headquarters company at one point. But between rotation and casualties, the turnover was tremendous, and they were trying to keep that regiment filled with Puerto Ricans. And they had very short, these were new draftees, and all they had was very minimal basic training. They shipped them over. And of course you started rotation, and I said, well, who do I rotate? Everybody came over together. Everybody has the same number of points. Who do I rotate? And they said, you're most deserving. Well, who is that? Your non-coms, right? So we got rid of all the non-coms. At one point I had a corporal as a platoon leader. That's how bad things were. We never had a full complement of officers in the company. When I first joined it, we did. The one officer had been killed, and I took his place. The other 3 platoon leaders were West Pointers, and then we had this Puerto Rican company commander, Puerto Rican executive officer, and then I showed up, the civilian, and this was the only time the company had a full complement of officers. Immediately after that, about less than a month later, the two of the West Pointers, one of them was transferred to another company, and 2 of them were evacuated with hepatitis over to Japan. And then we started getting replacement officers in, but they never had enough officers. Yeah. There were plenty of officers in 8th Army, but they're all way back there. Yeah. Yeah. And then as the personnel changed, the efficiency of the outfit just went all to pot, and then we had a lot of officers. You asked a question a long time ago. Some of the officers coming over there that were assigned to the 65th did not like Puerto Ricans. Okay, had a extreme bias against them. They were probably from a place like New York City, where they'd run into them there. I didn't know a Puerto Rican from a Cuban. I didn't. Moving from California there, and I never saw any Puerto Ricans in New Jersey growing up. But yeah, there was distinctly a strong bias against them, and so the outfit fell apart, and they had a couple of very unfortunate operations in 1953. Yeah. So their reputation is now on those operations late in the war, which was not the 65th Regiment. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, or?
Nope.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.